Well, I thought Dennis said I had 20 minutes, but today he said there are 9 speakers, so I have to keep it between 5 and 10, so that's kind of tough. Yes, Chuck?
You read my mind. Put the lights out.
Great. Okay, so here's my perspective on this little thing that went on. A little bit of my own personal history in WRTC. I've been involved since the first one, and as you look through the chart there, I've operated in all but 2 of them. I missed 2006 in Russia, but I did get to go to Katie Doerr's wedding. Since she's my niece, that took priority over going to Russia. I was supposed to be N2NT's partner, but K3LR substituted for me. I thought about competing in 2014, but that wouldn't have been fair because I was a chairman and I had a team of 500 people working with me instead of just one. So I didn't compete in that one, but the results have been pretty good. I do have a gold and 2 bronze medals for my activities. I was really, really hoping this time around, Bruce, I was really hoping that I could get a silver medal. That way I would have a clean sweep and I could retire from doing this thing. This is a photograph we took right after the closing ceremony. That's the chairman of all the WRTCs except for the 2006 event in Brazil. That's a fairly interesting group of characters, and you can see the call signs and the years and who was involved. But I thought it was pretty cool that we had almost everybody there. Maybe in Italy we'll be able to get them all. So in 2018, it was in Wittenberg, Germany, which is near Berlin in what used to be East Germany. So it's way over there. If you're not familiar with Wittenberg, it was the home of the Protestant Reformation. The guy there in the picture is Martin Luther, and you can't throw a rock in Wittenberg without seeing something named for Martin Luther or another picture of him. It's a beautiful city. It's a very flat area, which is why the Germans chose it. There are a lot of former collective farms available for use if you can get permission. So they managed to get us all with some pretty good operating locations. If you're familiar with the history of the Protestant Reformation, Mr. Luther nailed upon the door of the cathedral his 95 Theses, which were sort of, I don't think we're doing this whole Christianity thing right. What are these indulgences anywhere? I don't see them anywhere in the Bible. And he went on from there and sort of changed the world. But that's the door. The 95 Theses are now, or it's a replica of the door and it has the Theses all written on it. That's the market square with the statue of Luther. That's across the street from the opening and closing ceremony venue, and just a random street scene that I thought was pretty cool. It's a beautiful little city. There's not a lot of traffic there. It's real quiet, very peaceful, and it was a nice place to be. As far as travel, in my case, I drove down to New Jersey and did some last-minute packing with Andy at his location. Turns out there's a nonstop from Newark to Berlin, which was convenient. Everything else, every other city you had to leave from had a connection. We were met when we landed by this volunteer. He's, I forget his call, he's 80-something years old, and so is his wife. And that's my wife and Andy's wife. The reason we brought our wives is because everyone was entitled to 50 pounds of luggage. So with 4 of us, we could bring a lot more stuff. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So Karen had a suitcase full of radios, and Bonnie, and me. So anyway, we loaded all 200 pounds of radio stuff into the shuttle van. When we got to the hotel, the party was just beginning. We went a day early, but there were still a lot of people there. The headquarters hotel was a very busy place. The World Cup soccer games were on the big screens. The Ham Widows Ball, which was an innovation that we started here in 2014 and was a big hit, was repeated in Germany this year. And they had some tours available to famous cities like Leipzig, Dresden, Berlin, and so forth. And the picture on the top there, all 3 of those guys have been at most of the WRTCs, including the first one. I haven't seen F2CW since then. I see K3EST way too often. Down at the bottom, I see E77DX once every 3 or 4 years. You've probably worked him in every contest, but he was sort of representative of the crazy guys that were there, and it was great to see everybody from around the world that we don't see very often. These were the organizers, and they gave me a private backstage tour of the War Room, since I had given them a similar tour in 2014, and that's where all the last-minute planning and, oh my God, what do you mean they don't have coax at site, whatever. Quick, send someone out there with whatever they need.
On the left is DL6MHW, who was the guy behind the scenes, and Chris DL1MGB, who was the boss. And you can see he has a lot fewer post-it notes because he was mostly delegating things to MHW to get them done. But they really did a terrific job.
With the gentry.
And MGB is doing a gentry. If you don't know what a gentry is, good. So after we had some time to party out, it became time to start thinking about the contest. On Thursday morning at 8 a.m. there's a Q&A session, which, as predicted, had lots of questions that had no impact on the results, like, are you going to remove QSOs if it doesn't show up in someone else's log and we logged the zone wrong and we have the time wrong and the other guy has the band wrong, none of which mattered. There was one team that was placed in a separate category because it turns out they had stayed within the letter of the rules of the station setup, but managed to tweak it so that it gave them an advantage over everybody else, and everyone decided that it wasn't going to be fair. It turns out they didn't really do that well in the contest anyway, so the technology didn't really help them. 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday was a station draw.
And instead of how it's been done in the past, they drew by saying, okay, the furthest location from the hotel is this one. Now let's pick a team to go there. So they basically got everyone launched off to their locations in order of how far away they were. DJ3WE drew the team. The referees were pre-assigned, and we all picked our pre-assigned call signs that we didn't know what they were. And then we were escorted to the front of the hotel to go to the site. They had a very organized dispatch process. I don't know if you can see that, but in that spreadsheet, it lists exactly how far it was. The furthest away site was 1 hour and 26 minutes of drive time. The next one was 1 hour and 25 minutes, 1 hour and 24 minutes. So they brought us all out, and we were assigned to site UEB3. Remember that, UEB3. And we went out in front of the hotel, and there was a guy with a camper. He said, oh, there's plenty of room here in my camper for all your equipment. So we said, great. And we loaded all 200 pounds of equipment in, plus, a few other things. And then I noticed on the front of his camper, it said UEB4. And I said, wait a minute, we're going to UEB3. He said, oh, no, you're going to UEB4. And I said, no. So instead of a camper, we got a BMW Hatchback, and we put 200 pounds of radio equipment, plus the driver, plus me, plus Andy, plus our referee HA3NU, into a car that really wasn't designed to have anywhere near that much in it. When we got to the site, there was a tent, there was a
spider pole thing out there, and a big sign that said Achtung, and I think it means something like no one else beyond this point unless you're official. That's our site team, DO5AMF, YLM, and DF9PX. I brought them some New Hampshire t-shirts as swag, so that you can see that they're wearing New Hampshire Live Free or Die t-shirts. And that's the antenna. What's interesting about it is that it rotates from the bottom. The rotator was on the ground and the whole thing turned. It was an amazingly effective antenna. What we got when we arrived inside the tent, they had a complete floor in the whole tent for us, unlike what we had here in New England. We just had 3 big pieces of plywood. They had a big sheet that covered the whole floor. And there were 2 tables in there, one with 3 coax cables and 2 fans, a rotor box, and outlets, and 2 lamps and 2 chairs. 3 chairs, one for the referee. And the chairs were equally as uncomfortable as what we had in New England. Setting up, that's us unpacking 200 pounds of radio equipment, mostly cables and connectors and little boxes. Andy had everything labeled pretty carefully. He basically designed the whole station. And when we were setting it up, my role was to put on the music and get out of the way. And when he asked me see if you can find the cable that says B 6-pack, and then I handed that to him. And as a wireless hobby, of course, and as we organized things, Andy put all the stuff underneath my table so he wouldn't have anything in the way under his table on the right. We had a few problems on setup day. I learned a new German word. Repeat after me, Wackelkontakt. Good. Now the proper usage is, our 40-meter antenna is Wackelkontakt, because it was. We called it in with the beam team. They said, oh, yeah, they'll be over to fix it in a little while. They have to fix one at another site down the road from you, which has exactly the same problem. And it turned out that it was raining the day they were doing the setup, and the guy who was putting the connector on the 40-meter antenna said, okay, the connector's on, I'm done. and they said, did you tape it? He said, oh, geez, I forgot to tape it. And he went up and he put the tape on, and when he put the tape on, he wrapped it counterclockwise, which undid the connector partway. So we had that problem. That got fixed pretty quickly. We had one K3 that would just stop receiving every couple of minutes. Fortunately, we had a spare. The audio switching box I built had RF in it. I left my headset at the hotel, and score collection computer wasn't working. Turns out you have to click a box in N1MM plus, who knew? And the loose connector sort of made that a challenge as well. So we had a few problems, but we got that out of the way. Again, the hint is when you tape a connector, wrap the tape in the same direction that will tend to tighten the connector, not loosen the connector. But you can see they can service it pretty quickly. They just lowered the mast down, found the loose connector. As you can see, here's the problem. And then he fixed it and we were good to go. And that's what it looked like when we were finally set up. Nearly every team took this exact same picture of their tent, their antenna, and sunset. Contest day, the contest starts at 1200 Zulu, which is 2 p.m. local in Germany. We had breakfast, got some groceries on the way, and then a quarter of 2 in the afternoon, turned off the cell phones and handed them to the hosts, turned the radio volume down, opened the call sign envelope, programmed the call sign into N1MM, recorded some messages, and we were off to the races. The tent was very hot in the daytime. It was very cold at night. I wished that in the goodie bag that they had given us jackets. In fact, I was counting on it. They did not give us jackets, and I froze. But that's, we did what we could. Fortunately, we had these little earwigs. There were dozens of them wandering around in the tent, and every once in a while, one would bite me, and that would wake me up a little bit. So I don't know if that was a planned feature or what. I won't talk about the contest because there's 8 other speakers, and they'll probably talk about it. After the contest, our host said, well, we've been watching you on the scoreboard, and you did not so bad, which is a euphemistic way of saying, boy, you guys did terrible. We were 30th at the end, which was a bit disappointing. It wasn't anywhere close to a silver medal. The antenna takedown took less than an hour, and you can see that everything sort of collapsed down into something that would fit in the trunk of an average car. They didn't have to rent a lot of trucks to move all stuff around like we did when we had it here. Disconnecting all the connectors and packing everything up and trying to stuff it all back into the boxes from which it came took us 2 hours after being up for 24, and that was interesting. So after the contest, we all went back to the hotel, we hung out, we got some dinner, crashed out. The next day was the Berlin tour. That's us on the bus, but then you can see the traffic jam we were stuck in. So the 6-hour tour, which was supposed to be 2 hours driving, 2 hours back, and 2 hours sightseeing, turned into, okay, we hit traffic, so you have 30 minutes to go sightseeing and get back on the bus. So that was a little disappointing. But I did manage to take a photograph, which would not have been possible while the Berlin Wall was still up. You can see this is a replica. It's not the original sign that says, you're leaving the American sector. And I'm standing there with 4 Russians. RT8U, UA9MA, R somebody, and R0DX. And then we stood on the other side of the sign that says, you're entering the American sector, which is a picture, obviously, they would never have been able to take not too long ago. So the closing ceremony was terrific. They had this guy who's sort of a character actor who was Martin Luther. He was dressed like a monk, and he got up and said a few things about, we don't have these things, radios you call them, in my time, but I understand you're communicating around the world, and I communicate around the world too, but I communicate to God in prayer. And he was sort of interesting and amusing, and he was at both the opening and closing. And the mayor came, and there was great pomp and circumstance. And in the end, the Lithuanian team walked off with the gold medal and the big trophy. The German team came in second, and N6MJ and KL9A came in third, got gold medal. So now they're in the bronze and gold club. So people have been asking me all day, what happened? How come you came in 29th? We actually moved up 1 spot from 30th in the log checking. And, well, you can't win them all. We focused way too much on the station technology. We took all this new stuff that Tom added in N1MM Plus with the SDR and all this other stuff, so we could have a spectrum scope right there on the logging page, and we could go right through, we could just click, Andy hooked up a little macro and these little buttons, so all we had to do was hit a button, the VFO would move to the next pip on the screen that didn't correspond to a frequency where we had already worked someone and was probably a dupe, so we didn't waste time on those. So you just hit a button and listen and say, oh, okay, I'll call this guy, and then hit the button and call the next guy, and we got too wrapped up doing that. We didn't really spend enough time planning what we should have been doing. The local guys had a little advantage. They knew that 40 meters in the daytime is a really good band for big rates because Europe is a very big continent, but you can work all of it on 40 meters in the daytime and you can make a lot of rate in a lot of countries, which we didn't know. We went on 20 and 15, like you would do if you wanted to work Europeans from here, duh. Plus, there were a lot of really good teams, and if any of you listened to the radio DARC thing, they do a webcast and a shortwave broadcast thing. Before the contest, they interviewed me and they said, so who do you think is going to win? I said, well, you know, we're aiming for the silver medal, but, you know, I think the German team will do very well, and the teams that have scored well in the past few events will probably do well, but I would keep my eye on the Lithuanians because I don't think anyone's paying attention to them. And those guys came in 6th in Boston, and they were only operating with one radio for about 4 hours. So if they had both radios going for the whole time, they would have been on the medal stand and probably could have won. So I would keep my eye on the Lithuanians. Well, they went on and won the damn thing. So even though I didn't get a silver medal, I mentioned the Ham Widows Ball. They had a little competition among the women where they gave to see which one had suffered the most for their husband's sport. And there were like 2 or 3 of them left standing after all these questions. And then K3LA's wife told the master of ceremonies, ask how many of them have husbands with stations with towers in more than one house. So they asked that question, and my wife raised her hand, and everyone else said, no, 2 stations, really? And they sat down. So she was crowned queen of the Ham Widows Ball and was awarded the sash and the tiara. So at least somebody came home with some hardware. So comparing 2018 to 2014, I think the competition was pretty much on a par with what we did. The team selection and the rules were pretty much the same as what we had done, so they pretty much copied what we did. The sites were more equal, I think, by a little bit. They had the advantage of a geographic area with a lot of big, wide open spaces. The station designs had evolved to be way more complex this time. It is a freaking arms race. You know, 3 WRTCs ago, one team showed up with a triplexer, and that was considered a major technology advance. The next WRTC, about half the teams had triplexers. Here in Boston, almost all the teams did. In Germany, everyone had triplexers. About half the teams had outboard SDRs driving a third display or an on-screen display so that they could look at a whole band. One team went so far that they could actually operate full duplex and be calling CQ on one band, using a flex radio and listening on another band, and they were reclassified. So it really turned into an arms race. There was, the station designs were just way, way more complex. Thinking back to the first WRTC, we had a transceiver that was allowed to transmit. We had a second radio with a 50-foot wire, which was receive only. That's all we had. In a lot of ways, that was more fun. So anyway, there were some rumored issues with cheerleading. The Germans did not try very hard to prevent that. We did here. We made a big deal about it and said we were going to throw out unique QSOs. Some of the teams had a lot of QSOs with their home countries, so, but I don't think it really changed the order of finish, and so don't take that as sour grapes. It was just people rumored about that. The social events, I think, was about equal to what we did. The logistics, I think, were a little smoother here. The tour logistics worked out a lot better for us. My wife really complained a lot about the tours in Germany. You know, what, we're 6 hours on a bus and we get to see Berlin for half an hour? Something's wrong with that picture. And she said that the tours that she went on in Boston were a lot better. In fact, we got stuck with a 6-hour delay leaving the hotel on Tuesday due to traffic and a bus driver getting heat stroke, and just it was horrible. So, but in general, they did a very good job. I was very happy to see that the things worked out as well as they did. And now Italy in 2022. In Bologna, Marconi's birthplace, the first qualifying event will be ARLDX CW in 2019. And I plan to attend this one also, but this time as a tourist. That's it. Thanks.
Keep that on if you're gonna do questions or no?
Any questions, or do you want to hear the other speakers first? Yeah.
Oh, wait,
Back there.
wait.
Whose idea was it to use Pirates of the Caribbean as the opening ceremony march?
Oh, whose idea was it to use Pirates of the Caribbean as the opening ceremony march? Well, I guess that would have to fit in the category of one of the things that the Germans didn't anticipate, because as a result of that, YouTube killed the live stream, or whoever was streaming it, because it's copyrighted music, and so a lot of people weren't able to watch it. So I guess the only answer is, oh well. Anybody else with a question? Now let's get the other speakers, and then if there are other questions you think of, maybe we'll all take them at the end.